Welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show. I am your host, Willie Bragg. Today we have a guest. We have a returning guest, and his name is Dwight Welch. And we have better audio than we did the last time. It seems like we have it a little more functional now than we did about almost a year and a half ago when we did this. Remember, Dwight?
Yeah, we were trying to work out various kinks still.
Yeah, I don't think we have to worry about echoes and things of that nature at this time, and we don't have to worry about a delay and sound quality and all of that. Once I got the hang of StreamYards, it is extremely user friendly. You okay?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as I said, it's very user friendly and all of that. So, anyway, I would say right now we don't have anybody online, but somebody will look and listen to us, and they'll catch us here live and all that good stuff. And they, it is 11 o'clock in the morning. A lot of people are at work, so that is to be put into consideration too. So. But suffice to say, shall we go ahead and let you go and introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. So my name is Dwight Welch. I'm the campus pastor for United Campus Ministry at Montana State University in Billings, which is an ecumenical ministry. I've known Melvin for since the 90s. Since I was we have some shared political history, basically I think returning back to Montana, which is where I'm from originally, has been an interesting education in politics. So
Yeah. I remember we've known each other since the late 1990s. Corresponded initially online and met at the Socialist Party convention, and just had a connection from there. So we had a lot of battle scars in that party, but it made us stronger.
Exactly.
Yeah,
the joy of being a Gen X socialist.
Oh God, tell me about it. Tell me about it. Being on the left during the days of Reagan and Bush one, and actually being on the left in the days of Clinton. So being on the left during the days of Reagan, Bush one, and Clinton. Mm-hmm. That's quite a challenge there. So anyway. Looks like we had an election that a lot of people thought it was going to be a red tsunami. That turned out to be a red splash, a wimpy red splash.
Yeah, no, it did. It was telling the states where it was divided, and there was where the threat of what a Republican rule could look like was very evident. Democrats came out and overperformed every poll, overperformed every expectation. If you look at the Pennsylvania map from 2022 versus even 2020, I mean, Fetterman outperformed Biden, and obviously Shapiro outperformed everybody, but basically huge kind of shifts to the left. And even in Ohio, which was a heartbreaker for Tim Ryan, Democrats well exceeded expectations on both the congressional races as well as, even the statewide race. And where Democrats had an overwhelming advantage, like New York, which also had an issue with their maps being thrown out and replaced by a conservative court. That gave Democrats a disadvantage in New York. But I also suspect Democrats in a lot of blue areas didn't feel like they had to come out, that there wasn't as much at stake. And then, of course, if you're in the deep red, if you're in the deep red states, it's not clear that there was a Democratic or, it's kind of normal. There was a lot of hopes in Oklahoma, a lot of hopes in Florida that never obviously came to pass. Though Florida also suffered from a gerrymandered map. Um, what's fun is that when you look at the issues, people almost always voted left. It's just if it's a candidate or a party, right? So Nebraska raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour. I think South Dakota voted to expand Medicaid. Montana protected abortion rights. Kentucky protected abortion rights. So when you talk to people about issues, they're progressive, but they're still distrust, probably of both political parties, which is probably why we have the thing that we have. But there's a lot of Democrats that deserve credit for the hard work they did to pull off some pretty unlikely victories.
Well, the way I look at it is that the Republicans, the one thing I would say about this election is that I think that the Trump brand is dead. MAGA is dead, in my opinion, because what really messed it up for the Republicans what was basically putting out far right wing conspiratorial nutcase candidates, and they were so far to the right to the point where even a right leaning country like the United States with its Overton window, they were a little put off by some of the rhetoric, and I think with the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, it just, I think there was that variable that probably got out the Democrats motivated too. I think that basically was looking like a red splash, was going to look like a slim majority for the Republicans in the House, which could have been worse, and what's going to look like it's still kind of a toss-up what's going to happen in the Senate. I know that's going to be questionable. I would say that the Democrats could have done better if they would have governed more like an FDR Democrat than a Bill Clinton Democrat. They're still resistant in spite of what Bernie and the squad has done, and unfortunately sometimes I feel like that they have acquiesced toward Biden and Harris and Pelosi, and that the Democratic leadership still rather listen to Manchin and Sinema, and I still think that's a problem, and they need to step up in their game, and they need to go aggressive and fight. If they're going to do this, they need to fight the Republicans and be obstinate and aggressive. If they don't, the game will be up, and unfortunately we could see a Ron DeSantis as president in 2024, which would be dangerous as hell.
Yeah, so I think that might be some of the election results too, because it was interesting. 18 to 29-year-olds had a 37-point advantage for the Democrats, and they came out. Young people have been lectured since before I was born. Well, I was born when they changed the Constitution to allow 18-year-olds to vote, and you mentioned about the 90s and how low young people's participation rate is in that period of time, but not this year. They came out, and that generation, the Gen Zs, may have saved the Congress and prevented the worst. And some people have speculated the student loan forgiveness, even partial. I had so many students I work with on our campus who were impacted, or recent graduates who were impacted by that Biden administration decision, including a friend of mine who is a student of mine who was a strong Bernie supporter and, like me, wants total forgiveness of loans. But he was so excited and called me when because he realized that he qualified essentially to have his loans wiped out. The marijuana issue and the way the Biden administration has moved on that, not insignificant. I obviously think that, like you said, Dodd's, when voters were asked their top issues among Democrats, it was usually abortion and preserving democracy. So Democrats who voted definitely understood what the stakes were in terms of these issues. I on the one hand, I would be hopeful that Democrats could be more aggressive legislatively, because if it looks as if it does, I suspect, if I was to guess what the Senate will look like, I suspect it will look like 51 or 52 Democrats, because I think both Nevada and Arizona are holding. So I guess it'd be 51. So we will already have 50 Democrats in the Senate. And then if Warnock wins, which I think is likely, we should have 51. And that's not going to break filibusters of Manchin and Sinema. But it's an amazing thing. They were so unreliable that even the most basic things to get the government working, they could torpedo. Just to have that simple majority of 51, I think will be a difference. Now, the issue is what happens to the House. And you're right. I think the House will have a slight Republican majority, but they're still calling racist. So we're actually still kind of sitting on who's going to be the majority. But we can assume that whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, it's going to be a 1 or 2 seat majority. Anybody dies, anybody has a heart attack, anybody's forced out for a sex scandal.
Yeah.
These things happen right in Congress. And we've never had the House this close, where literally we could actually see, if you remember the early 2000s when the Senate switched in the middle.
I do remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it? God, I can't think of his name. He was from Vermont or Maine. I think it was Vermont. It was Vermont. Jeffords. Yeah, Jeffords switched parties, which changed the balance. And we could see that in the House. It's going to be crazy, wild time. And the question is, I guess, who's going to be controlling the Republican caucus? Montana's had before in the past a legislature and Alaska's in the same boat, where a few of the moderate Republicans could work with the Democrats to produce a functional majority to pass legislation. Things like keeping the government going and not throwing away the debt limit, our debt limit or debt credit. But that was in Montana and Alaska, where you could actually find moderates. In this Congress, given how polarized and how gerrymandered districts are, I'm not sure how many of those people are left. A lot of them lost their primaries in 2022. So I honestly have no idea what legislatively. My hope is that Biden would, be very generous with the executive orders. Get things done. You got 2 years to make the case to the American people. It mattered. The Democrats are there. And notice that both the student loan and the marijuana thing was executive order. So
my advice. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, not that there wasn't some legislative successes. There were, but that was his last statement. Biden's last statement before the midterms were executive orders.
Well, my advice to the administration and Congress, if it's possible, I would say executive orders, prescription drug. I mean, we're going to do incremental. You and I, we know what needs to be done. I mean, we know we're both socialists. We know what needs to be done, but on a realistic level, looking at what we got in America, what needs to be done that's realistic, executive orders, if it can be done, basically prescription drug, negotiation for lower drug prices. I know it sounds incrementalist, and I don't like that, but this is what we got, the situation. I say let him, that would be significant right there, or if it could be done with a stroke of a pen, lower the Medicare eligibility down to 55 or 50, or something along those lines.
That would be huge. And there's 2 legislative proposals. Boy, I don't know if you can do, I don't think you can do funding in this way, but there's 2 bits that were left out that were really significant in the Build Back Better plan. One was the child care tax credit, which cut child poverty in half. in just like a year or two. I mean, it's very hard to imagine a more successful policy. And ironically enough, probably dreamed up in some ways in the Reagan years. It was probably an extension of the earned income tax credit, right? Or negative income tax, which Nixon played with, as well as the a universal basic income. But as you could tell, our politics are farther, not near as progressive as when we were young. But I don't know how you resuscitate that, but there's that. But I know that Mitt Romney expressed interest in some version of a child tax credit. I think it could make a big difference for families. And because while inflation is tapering, and interestingly enough, while it is tapering, employment is still, the hiring still keeps on happening. But childcare is a big thing. And obviously, like I said, for the most economically vulnerable, the tax credit meant the world. I mean, I don't know how you could do that with executive. That may be legislative. But I feel like something's very incomplete about the Biden first term if you don't address that. And I'm kind of curious to see if that will be picked up again.
Another thing that could be done, if we got to do something about the courts, because the courts, we have basically two illegitimate people in the Supreme Court from my perspective. Gorsuch, I believe it's Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, because of Anthony Scalia's death in early 2016. Remember, Mitch McConnell pulled that number where we can't have a Supreme Court justice appointed a year before the election. And then when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, he rushed to get a Supreme Court justice in before the election. Remember that shenanigans?
Yeah, by the way, you know how they always say, well, the court is always 9. Well, apparently Mitch McConnell decided it could be 8. So there's nothing sacred about the number of Supreme Court justices. There is a Democratic proposal floating around that's not as big of a change, but it's, again, reasonable. 18-year term limit on the Supreme Court, which would basically knock Clarence Thomas right out. I don't know. It could affect either Roberts or Alito, but I don't remember the years that they were appointed by Bush. The thing about it is, most countries, if they do have a court, do have term limits. I think Clarence Thomas, and it actually may have saved us some heartbreak if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had been term limited out, right? And Obama might have been in a position, to appoint somebody. But I think that that's an interesting proposal to me. Because right now the incentive structure is to appoint people who are literally in their 30s and 40s. I mean, I don't know how old Amy Coney Barrett is, except for that you and I are older than her. And that's intentional. She's supposed to serve in the court for the next 40 years. Well, that needs to just kind of stop. That kind of.
Yeah, at the very minimum, I would say term limits. I do think 18 is a little bit too long. I would say a 10-year term limit is a little more. I'm a little more receptive to a 10-year term limit to the courts, because it'll keep them from being too partisan, and it'll also. I just think I just think that would be a better proposal. But I would say, maybe I was on the fence about stacking the courts, because I'm conflicted with stacking the courts. On one hand, Donald Trump has fucked up the courts, pardon my language, has fucked up the courts so badly for the next generation. It's like you have to almost justify, expanding the courts. But then what if you get Ron DeSantis in 2024? Because I'm going to tell you, I don't think that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee in 2024. It's my opinion. I don't think he's going to be the nominee. I just don't see it in the cards that he's going to be. I think that something's going to happen, that he's not going to be the nominee. They're going to do something they're going to bribe him, or they're going to kind of do a little shenanigans to make sure he doesn't get the nomination. And I think that the election yesterday, or day before yesterday at this point, destroyed that MAGA brand. And Ron DeSantis is the new rock star in Florida. And I think he's a dangerous man. And so if we expand the courts under Biden and DeSantis become president, that could lead to a very bad situation. So I'm not sure what to do. I'm conflicted about expanding the courts. I'm so angry with how the right wing, how Mitch McConnell and how, the right wing have actually had an advantage on the courts. I just want to beat them at their own game, but I don't want to do it where it will be blowback against the left, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, I think the term limits thing is pretty easy to convince most Americans about. I would say, to me, it's reasonable that, we have 13 circuit courts, so why don't we have 13 justices? Because, when it was raised to 9 before, it was to match how many circuit court systems there were. The one thing that has been good news, and not very well sung, though, is that actually Biden now has appointed far more judges than Trump did at this time. And if the Democrats keep control of the Senate, that means more judges just down the line. It means that if Clarence Thomas, for some reason, could no longer serve on the court, Biden can get his nominee through. Just having a 5-4 conservative court would open up a whole lot of space. It's the 6-3 business that has just been nuts. And Roberts could be the pivotal kind of vote again, to kind of side with Democrats now and again. But Biden has been doing very, very effective, more effective than almost any president in recent memory in terms of getting judges through. And so, I mean, this keeping the Senate, it's not something legislatively people feel, but Doc, as you can tell, when you get these crazy right-wing kind of court decisions in the lower level, that's a Trump appointee, right? It's going to matter to get as many judges as you can, and just through that particular process. Now I want to mention with DeSantis, I think he is MAGA, but it's MAGA decoupled from Trump as a person. But in some ways, DeSantis has the same swagger, the same disdain for the rest of us that thrills conservatives. He uses the state to punish the wrong people, right? In Florida. I've been I've been reading conservatives on Twitter, and it's amazing. They're very excited by the idea that the government exists to punish the rest of us. It's not really any particular vision of what you actually want to do. I mean, this is why DeSantis was lost when they had the hurricane, because that's government doing positive things, and Biden flies down to Florida, and kind of like COVID. This is government doing things that tries to help people, and they're just utterly unprepared for that. What they want is the culture war. What they want is to punish the rest of us. And DeSantis has shown that he can do it in Florida, and you don't need Trump and his personal failings, of which there are so many.
Well, I've said he's more dangerous than Trump because Trump is a buffoon, and he's incompetent, and DeSantis is competent and a serious politician. And I think that MAGA is not necessarily, I think that a lot of people get the wrong idea what MAGA is. I think MAGA is not necessarily, I don't necessarily think that MAGA is always necessarily a default worship of Trump. I think that Trump is the dear leader that they follow at the moment, because a lot of the really toxic people in the MAGA coalition currently were Ted Cruz supporters, for example. People like that. I mean, like a Dinesh D'Souza type. Those type of people were Ted Cruz supporters, for example. I call them neocon QAnon.
This is that's the right is pretty malleable. I mean, it's one of those things. but one way you know that Trump won in the end, even though I think you're right, I think it's more likely DeSantis. And you can always tell. So there's a political theory that says, despite all the cool, far-ranging debates that happen in the primaries, that the most common way a nominee becomes the nominee is if they're picked by the party elites. And the issue is that, in other words, that voters look to important voices nationally to make these kind of determinations. When when it was decided that, like, I think that's what happened to Biden. Biden was decided by the party elites, and Democratic voters agreed with it. And of course, Democrats won. So it's hard to, it's hard to say. But the thing is that right now, when you're watching the Fox News universe, when I'm listening to top religious right leaders, they're all in for DeSantis. And if that trickles down to the kind of right-wing media ecosphere, whatever, that means a lot of people at home who are Republican voters in primaries will pay attention and will be more likely to select DeSantis as a result. But the thing that won't be selected, and this is what's sad, is Governor Hogan and Governor Baker. Governor Hogan is from Maryland and Governor Baker from Massachusetts. They're some of the most popular governors in the United States, and they're Republicans, because folks don't remember, but back in the 80s, majority of voters voted Republican, and since '92, it's been the reverse. It's been most people vote Democrat, right? It's hard to imagine we've had more people vote Democrat in a longer period of time in the U.S. history than at any time in our history, basically from '92 to today. Though there's debates about '04. The thing about it is, so Hogan's really popular. Baker's really popular. Baker was replaced by a MAGA candidate who ran because he was retired or term limited out. And of course, that MAGA candidate got pummeled, right? The Democrats picked up the governorship in Maryland. They picked the governorship in Massachusetts. But Hogan was like, oh, I saw the election results and I think I want to run. And you're like, people don't want a Hogan. Did people in Maryland? Yes. Do Republican primary voters? No. I would be convinced that the Republicans learned their lesson over the last decade if they would pick somebody like a Hogan or a Baker, but they're not. It's going to be somebody like DeSantis, right? DeSantis captures what people love about Trump. Moderate, competent Republican governors do not.
Well, they like somebody with a Mitt Romney demeanor, but meaner than Mitt Romney, but without the comedy show that Trump provides.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the issue, and DeSantis provides that. But Democrats picking up several governorships because because in the end, it's the show. And that also indicates to me in the other way in which MAGA is just simply not interested in things like governing. Right? Because, it was, do you remember, what's his name? The guy who got forced out after the sex scandals. He lost a primary in North Carolina. Why am I blanking on his name? The young guy who was disabled, member of Congress, 25 years old.
Cawthorn. Madison Cawthorn.
Yeah, so Madison Cawthorn, when he first got elected, every congressman or congresswoman gets legislative aids, as part of their budget. And part of what those legislative aids do is they read the legislation, they can give information about that to the member of Congress so they can make decisions. And Cawthorn fired all of them. He didn't want any policy analysis. What he wanted was, and he put his money into PR because he wanted what Marjorie Taylor Greene does, and hopefully Lauren Boebert won't be doing anymore.
I've heard it. She may be gone.
She may be gone, right? Is that these people don't exist to actually pass bills. They exist to be on Fox News. And there's something about the MAGA world that has given up on the idea that the government would actually do anything. And therefore, when Trump ran in 2020, it was amazing that the GOP did not produce a platform at the Republican convention. Because when you've got a tribe or a cult of personality, you don't need like an agenda. There
was no platform at all.
No, they didn't vote on a platform. Isn't that crazy? I had Republicans that are like, I agree with the Republican platform more than the Democrats. No, there wasn't a platform. The platform was whatever Trump decides we want to do. But, every convention, right? I mean, when we were in the Socialist Party, I remember sitting long hours, right, in hotel rooms trying to hammer out what is our platform we're going to go into the election with. They didn't do it in 2020.
I remember that myself.
Yeah, I know. I remember that too. Did that a few times. But no, I mean, the Socialist Party took their platform more seriously than the Republican Party. What does this say? And
wow.
The Socialist Party wasn't going to get elected anywhere.
I'm flabbergasted. I had no idea the Republicans literally did not have a platform in 2020. I mean, and the thing about it is, I mean, Trump was just a bigger asshole in 2020. He was everything that was despicable about Republicans prior to 2016, but he hammed it up like turned the volume up, and it's just kind of like everything you hated. Everything you was hating about Bush and Cheney and Reagan and Bush one and all of them. I mean, he just kind of cranked up the volume and he just cranked it up and was really obnoxious with it.
Yeah, though I will never forgive this 21st century timeline where I literally I was in Sheridan, Wyoming, and I was in Cody. I was doing some sort of presentation on LGBT issues in Cody, Wyoming, and during the primary. And I tried to stop by the Republican headquarters just to pick up a Cheney sign, just for the historical moment that was captured at that time. But they were both closed. And also, when I talked to voters in Wyoming, they were highly uncomfortable with the national kind of focus on that particular state. But interestingly enough, Cheney, there was a few endangered Democrats, including in Virginia and some other places, where Cheney campaigned for, and it certainly didn't hurt. It certainly didn't hurt some of those Democrats keeping their seats in Congress. But it's a very weird timeline. My first memory of when I moved to Wyoming was protesting, when I was a pastor in Sheridan, was protesting at the Dick Cheney Federal Building, which is in downtown Casper, for Occupy, for the Occupy movement. And he even got on local television. It was going, wow, we have Occupy in Wyoming. And that was great. But to fast forward a decade, and we live in a weird timeline.
Yeah, but I just can't link arms with Liz Cheney. Just can't do that because she.
In Wyoming, it's kind of like the Democrats are like a third party or something. So, I totally respect my friends who voted for Liz in Wyoming, but I don't forgive this timeline because in a sane world, the Republican Party is Liz, right? Cheney, or it is even better. It's John Kasich or Paul, or Hogan and Maryland. That should be the Republicans, right? And people like AOC and Bernie should be the Democrats, but instead, that's not the timeline we live in. So we have strange bedfellows. But the Communist Party always had a line about the United Front, right? Like, how are you going to defeat the fascists? You got to get everybody you can on board.
Yeah, I don't know. Liz Cheney. She and her father. And he's such a nasty man.
He was
what's that? You know what's sad is that that the Democrats would give the nomination to Liz Cheney before they'll allow Bernie or AOC near it.
Well, yeah, there's always people who, I mean, the fact is, she was one of the most effective kind of spokespeople for trying to explain to the American people what happened on January 6th. And for that, she'll always just be kind of one of the heroes of the story, even though we can know that we don't get a Donald Trump without the failure of Iraq, which was directly connected to the failure of her dad, obviously. The other issue is, in other words, because I think Iraq convinced people, like Katrina, government doesn't work. Government's always on the side of the elites. It's never on your side. And that kind of cynicism, it doesn't always end up in a Bernie direction. It can end up in a Donald Trump direction, right? When society doesn't work. But the thing about it is, where was I going with Cheney? But here's the deal. They actually, the January 6th hearings impacted Democrats. It did not impact Republicans or even independents. And that is telling. In other words, one of the things it's telling is, no, I don't think Liz Cheney will be a Democratic nominee for anything. In the end, one of the intriguing things when they were interviewing Hispanics, especially in Texas and a lot of places, was that when they voted Democrat because of health care, which kind of disappeared from the national discourse. But a lot of voters are very, I mean, like I said, South Dakota just voted for Medicaid expansion. The thing is, people are very concerned about healthcare. They're not going to get Democrats are going to produce a Liz Cheney, and Liz Cheney, unfortunately, doesn't have a political future. She has a commentator future, to be sure, right? She will get many speeches, and she will be a person of interest. But in the end, Democrats actually care about healthcare access, right? They care about the kind of issues that people like Fetterman talked about and Ryan talks about, and Democrats across the country talked about, and Liz Cheney's just not in that universe. And in some ways, I think Bernie and AOC are far more representative of what most Democrats, not as symbols, but in terms of.
You don't think that they would try to? Hello.
Is that what the credit for Biden getting his agenda done does belong to the squad, right? They were the ones who kind of held the show together. And I honestly think that the Democratic Party should be very gracious and grateful.
But the Democratic Party has actually pretty much has kind of just treated them terribly, and they just kind of looks like they just whipped in line behind they're just. Seems like they've just been kind of easily manipulated, and they don't really do any budging like I wanted them to do. I mean, I wanted them to come to start a ruckus, and I mean, and to kind of do the hostile. Hello, you there?
Yeah, I keep on getting weird spam calls, so I apologize.
No, you're fine. I kind of wanted them to come in there to do the. I wanted them to do to Nancy Pelosi what the Tea Party did to John Bonner. Yeah, I mean, I wanted that sort of thing. I wanted these Justice Democrats to come in there and to I mean, really, to start a civil war inside the Democratic Party and do a hostile takeover, because sometimes I feel like they've been kind of whipped into discipline, because they don't really, they seem to just they seem to bend the knee a little bit too much these days. It's just my opinion.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, the thing is that if the Republicans take the House, which seems likely, but we don't, like I said, don't quite know at this late hour. Here's the thing: they will probably have gotten literally a handful of seats. which means basically, because the Democrats lost a lot of seats in 2020 is the thing, right, in the House, and so Nancy Pelosi's majority was amazingly small.
Yes, it was.
Yet the fact that you could get the kind of legislative agenda that Biden and the Democrats are able to get through is a crazy amount of discipline. So we will not see that discipline if the Republicans get control. But the Democrats, a crazy amount of discipline. And nobody believed that anybody outside of Nancy Pelosi could pull it off. But I mean, if but she's like 80 something. I don't know if she'll retire. And I've heard that a speculation, especially if she's not. I don't think she wants to stay as minority leader, if that's the case. But it would take somebody with that kind of disciplinary power to do it. And that's highly unusual. That's not been the norm either among the Democrats, nor has it been the norm in Congress in general. And despite how right-wing and ideological the Republicans are, they're already doing a rebellion against Kevin McCarthy. And
he's going to have a hard time with them.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is and the issue that's tricky is this. I mean, the Democrats, this is what happens in labor, and why I have no forgiveness for the right wing of the Labor Party. Yeah, because the only way you really can get confidence from voters is not only pass things, but to do so as a party. And the thing that really produced resentment in me is the way in which Jeremy Corbyn was so undermined, that had they gone into like the 2017 election actually united, he could have been prime minister, is the thing. And I think Democrats were aware of that. I mean, I think AOC and Bernie were aware of that, even if the Democratic Party implodes, progressives get wiped out too. Right, they're just as vulnerable. Not everybody is, right, but often some of the best progressives we have actually come from fairly divided. Think of Katie Porter in California, right? I mean, I think she's winning, or I think they maybe already called it for her, but that's a tough district. But she's unrelenting as a progressive, and she's also one of the best public exponents of a progressive view on especially the way in which corporate interests just are ripping people off, right? But she has to convince a pretty purple district to send her back. If the Democratic Party feels like it's falling apart, you lose Katie Porter, right? You lose some of these progressives around the country. So I think AOC and Bernie are much more aware and careful about the Democratic Party as a whole and their progressive colleagues, whereas Sinema and Manchin, I don't know, they're the ones who blow up the system, right? I mean, really, I mean, it's been maddening and to watch. But I actually give more credit to Manchin than I do Sinema, because Manchin is tracking really close to how voters in West Virginia have said they want him to act. Sinema will not be the next nominee when her time comes up, right? She does not. She's
there for the money.
Kelly does. Yeah, exactly.
So well, I'll tell you, I enjoy the actions that was being done against people like Sinema, the people that were following her to the bathroom or following her and disrupting her wedding ceremony that she was officiating, and same thing with Manchin, and the activists that was doing these things, because I think that's kind of needed when these politicians, when they go and turn their backs on the party politicians are supposed to represent a party that on paper is supposed to represent the people, and then they're kind of doing their thing to sidetrack. And Build Back Better was destroyed because of people like Sinema and Manchin. I think they need to be made to feel uncomfortable and all of that. And same thing same thing like almost 2 years ago with Nancy Pelosi with that slim majority. I think they needed to hold her seat hostage and do a what they called the force to vote thing back 2 years ago. I think that and it sounds impolite and it sounds almost like a Bolshevik tactic. I know, but I think that's what needs to be done to make these people feel uncomfortable and tell them, you play ball or we're going to make a lot of trouble for y'all.
Well, I think that will happen with Sinema because, like I said, I think she'll be primaried out. I mean, the sad fact is the majority of the Democratic caucus does not support Medicare for all. I wish that was not the case. I would say that in the last I don't even know what they call it, the Stop Inflation Act, right? Was a huge support for was a huge bit of money dedicated to the continual expansion of healthcare insurance subsidies, right? And to be self-interested, my health insurance went from about $700 a month under Trump to $100 and some under Biden because of it. So healthcare spending really did get impacted by the Biden years. But the thing is, the for-profit system is not sustainable, and if we don't get Medicare for all, I think things like what you said earlier in the beginning of this thing, right? Lower Medicare to 55 or 50. One of the things in the Build Back Better plan was trying to figure out a way to expand Medicaid to every state in the country. There's still about a dozen states that don't have it. It is telling to me, though, that when the Supreme Court said states don't have to accept Medicaid, one of the things that expansion is, of course, all the right-wing ideological bravado, and the fact was, most Republican states rejected it. But the thing is that public health care works, right? It's how the Democrats won in Kentucky last time, by the way. And it's basically, we now know that Oklahoma, I was in Oklahoma, which, by the way, went for 26% voted for Hillary, right? So it's about as red of a state as you could possibly imagine, voted for Medicaid expansion. And South Dakota did as well. I think Missouri did as well. The logic of a public system, and when people experience it, they want it. And even red state America wants it. And so I think the argument's on our side. In the end, it's on our side. And if you could decouple it, I don't know how you do it, but you just got to almost like decouple it from parties. Like if you ask people, I was talking to very conservative family members in North Dakota. Should people be turned away from the hospital? Or should you go bankrupt, or should it be about money, whether you can go to the hospital or get the surgery you need? And they're like, of course not. And that's the intuitive position. That's, I think, the one most Americans.
Hold on.
Repeat
that again, Dwight. Repeat that again. Oh, you blacked out.
Oh, I got many phone calls. So the result is, when I mentioned about Medicaid expansion, Missouri, South Dakota, Oklahoma, it's just a way of saying we have the argument, and people, and obviously people vote for it. And what I mentioned earlier, I was listening to when they were talking about Latino voters, healthcare and healthcare access was one of the top issues. And even though nationally it didn't seem to be always raised in the national debates, but it is an ongoing concern. Americans are concerned about access, and so Democrats have a winning argument. I think the Medicare for all folks have a winning argument in the end. And so we'll figure out how to get there. But my guess is the fact that Medicaid expansion keeps on winning is a sign to me people want access to healthcare, and we can talk to people about that.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'm just trying to think.
I was gonna say, it's nice when the left has popular opinion positions that most people want. That's a
Yeah,
good sign.
yeah, I just, just sometimes I mean, maybe I'm just a little impatient at times because, as I said, just all my life, just seeing how the country, how the country's been, and just kind of like I don't know. I mean, we haven't had that $15 hour minimum wage, and I was fairly sure we were going to get that, and that didn't happen. And
Nebraska's getting it.
huh?
Nebraska's getting it.
Yeah, I mean, like basically like on a national level,
Yeah,
and so yeah, I mean it happened on the state level. I mean, hell, I mean, Augusto Pinochet DeSantis state have it down in Florida, so I mean, but it wasn't because of him. I mean, the people
no.
themselves voted for it. But that's the thing right there. I mean, that there's a little bit of timidness when the Democrats do some good. It seems like the Democrats do get a little bit timid about the good that they do when they do some good. I have noticed that, haven't you?
Timid as in not being proposing significant a change as one could.
When they do a reform that has some good, they tend to not want to broadcast it as much.
Well, it's an intriguing thing. How do you do broadcast it? I mentioned to you yesterday. I was doing pulpit supply in Sydney, Montana, and Sydney is a town that is near the North Dakota Montana border. Someday we need to do a kind of a podcast or do something about like red state America, right, and rural America and the left. But one of the things that intrigues me is that I flew in. I flew from Billings to Sydney. They have a regional airline. Um, it's a 6-seater, or maybe it was an 8-seater. By the way, it's subsidized by the federal government. And I walked into the Billings airport, which is being totally renovated. It looks so impressive and almost like a hip airport, if anything. And I fly into Sydney, and of course, Sydney's airport is being doubled in size, and that was specifically because of the infrastructure bill that Biden and the Democrats passed last year, right? But in 2020, about 75 to 80% of Richland County, which is where Sydney is located, voted for Donald Trump. So the utter disconnect from the fact that dollars flow, not because of Republicans, but because of Democrats in the reddest states in the country. And you can visibly, tangibly see the results. And the fact that people are not in a position to make the linkage. Now, there's a lot of reasons why. One, obviously, Fox News is going to talk about it. Two, and the Democrats have nothing equivalent. But we also had Republicans who just outright lied, basically claiming credit for bills they voted against. But I'll tell you, the model of getting the word out is John Tester. If you follow John Tester on Twitter, if there's a dime that comes into Montana, Tester's there, and he's really willing to talk about it. And I'm convinced that's part of the issue. The Democrats, like you said, they need to talk about it. We needed there's a couple people I trust in the U.S. Senate that I think understand the messaging. And not always they're not nationally known, but like Brian Schatz in Hawaii, and I think Chris Murphy in Connecticut are people that I follow. But Tester to me understands it's how do you get the money that's going to benefit rural America? Because Eastern Montana, if the government shuts down, I'll give you an example. If the Republicans get control of Congress, one of the things will happen is they're going to shut down the government, because that's what Republicans do when they get control of Congress, right? It'll be about the wall. Yeah, it'll be about legal immigration. It'll be something. And when I was in Sydney, or I'll just mention several small towns, Miles City and Glendive and Glasgow, one of the things you discover is they're really dependent on federal dollars. And what I mean by that is federal employees and federal government offices. They're regional centers for government. We like in Miles City, where I grew up and have family. We've got all sorts of like national agencies, federal agencies that are regionally located there. When the government shuts down, it is the biggest removal of middle-class income to the economies of Eastern Montana. You are just walloping Eastern Montana. And we're going to have a member of Congress, and Matt Rosendale, who's going to totally support that. He's going to totally support shutting down the government, because basically he's an insurrectionist who was a big fan of, he literally hangs out with the Oath Keepers, right? That's our member of Congress. He hangs out with the Oath Keepers. And so he's going to vote when the Republicans, if they get control of the House, it's going to pummel Eastern Montana. And yet, if you talk to a lot of folks, they go, well, the Democrats have forgotten rural America. The Republicans truly get it. Well, if they would stop pummeling them, right? If they'd actually allow federal dollars to flow, if they'd actually recognize who is the middle class in rural America, and how do you support that middle class? But anyways, follow John Tester, who's coming up for re-election in 24 in a very red state. And I think, boy, I just figuring out how the communication thing is key. But the other issue which you raised is, I think in 2008, when the Democrats took control of Congress, or 2006 when the Democrats took control of Congress, there was a lot of legislative aides who admitted that they didn't think they were going to get into power, and they felt like they were a bit lost, like they didn't have a direction. Like, yeah, you can actually do things. When you get in power, you're supposed to do things, So getting that ethos, I think this Congress is better than that. But when Obama was president, and he had 59 senators, you still couldn't get 50 Democrats to do anything under Obama, right?
I do remember that. Yes,
it was nuts. It's like, why are you guys even there, right? So we've had done, I'll say, more with 48 Democrats than we had with 59. And partly that's because the Democratic Party is a lot more disciplined. The right wing is much more right wing. But those 59 Democrats were, imagine a U.S. Senate with 10 mansions. That was, remember what Claire McCaskill in Missouri? She might as well have been a mansion.
I remember when she was defeated, and she was telling Democrats, "Don't campaign on Medicare for all."
Yeah, no, this is exactly. Yeah, there was. So we had a Senate of almost a 10 mansions, and now we don't. We know how one or two can make a difference, but the thing about it is, so the Democrats have been much more adept at this. But yeah, follow John Tester. Because the thing about it is, Claire McCaskill was making a point, but I think in a way that's quite silly. Obviously Democrats want to represent rural areas, or should want to, and it matters, but you got to do stuff. And the thing, and the reason why to me Tester's a model. And by the way, lots of red state Democrats, Mark Kelly being one of them, right? There's a lot of red state Democrats that deserve credit for making the case for the Democratic Party and for Biden's agenda. And they're not a cinema, and they're not a mansion, and they're Tester never blew anything up, right? He was somebody. My God, who was another person who was trying to undermine Biden was Robert Menendez. I can't say his name. Menendez in New Jersey doesn't get. Yeah, he doesn't get the press, but you're kind of like going. But yeah, people like Tester were doing the hard lifting, and But yeah, to me, it's like follow the dollars. That's my argument for Red America is follow the dollars. And for progressives or people who say, well, is this a good Democrat or not? Well, are they actually spending the money? Because if they're not, it's all show.
Well, I'll tell you how my candidate for U.S. Senate North Carolina did. Matthew Hoh, the Green Party, got 29,000 votes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, now, yeah, third party races are kind of tricky. We had it's hard to measure, though. I would say for the Green, it's got to be somewhat ideological, right? It's got to represent a lot of progressive people in North Carolina who are wanting something different. And so that's an encouraging sign, right? Sometimes third parties can be weird conduits for all sorts of frustrations that may or may not be progressive. But everything I've heard from you about the Greens in North Carolina is it's a touch point for some folks, for some progressives to be involved in the political process. So, yeah, I mean, I'm disappointed because we had an independent who ran to the right, and a lot of Democrats voted for this independent instead of our congressional candidate in Eastern Montana, the 2nd district, which is, I think, was unfortunate. Republican probably still would have won, but if you're going to vote third party, vote because you want something progressive, but don't vote third party somebody who's actually to the right, which is
like the Green Party candidate in Minnesota during the time when I think Paul Wellstone, before he died, wasn't that Green Party candidate to Paul Wellstone's right?
I think I remember that, and that happened in Montana too. Oh, God, when in the Western District, we had somebody running against Pat Williams, and he was Kelly was his name. I can't remember his first name, and he was claiming to be to the left of Pat Williams, but when you looked at it, almost every issue, he was to the right. It was just so yeah, you gotta follow.
Happens in
actually find
Canada
what the
too.
candidates believe.
Happens in Canada too. Apparently, the Green Party's to the right of the NDP in Canada.
Yeah, that is often the case. Yeah, that is often the case. The Green Party in Canada is, I hate to say it, I mean, it's a generalization, but her last name's May, and I can't remember her first name. It's not Teresa, because that's UK.
Oh, yeah.
She kind of is, I mean, her politics is this kind of weird anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theory kind of place, and so the Greens aren't always really the left. They're just kind of, in Canada, they're just kind of they kind of draw from that conspiratorial base, whereas the organized left is clearly with the NDP, especially in the western part of the country, where the NDP is the strongest.
NDP is always my model.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, there you go. Well, and what the advantage of the NDP has, I'll tell you what. And I wonder about this about the U.S. I don't know how you do this, right? So in Canada, people are always worried about the NDP splitting the votes from the Liberals, right? But I actually don't think, for the most part, that happens. I mean, there are a couple instances, maybe, but what happens is, I mean, the Liberals tend to represent Eastern Canada and the NDP Western Canada, right? So like right now, and also the NDP tends to be more bread and butter a bit than Liberals, but so like in Alberta, Justin Trudeau is grossly unpopular. I mean, I doubt he has he might have a 30% approval rating. I'm making that up. It's something, he's a very polarizing figure in Canadian politics. And especially in the rural and the prairie provinces, the Liberal Party and Trudeau is just dead. But the center left doesn't have to vote Liberal, right? They can vote NDP. And, they have, in fact, polls suggest the NDP might actually win Alberta next year. You're not stuck with one party. But the thing that I would love is this. I think there are center left voters in North Dakota, Nebraska, South Dakota, but the National Democratic Party is dead to them. And there are probably conservative voters in Vermont or center right voters in Vermont and Massachusetts, but everything's MAGA. Like, why can't they have their own parties? Why can't we separate the national from the provincial or from the state, right? So that there's an organic local way in which center left and center right voters can organize themselves quite apart from the national politics, because that's what the NDP is doing in Alberta. That's what they're doing in Saskatchewan, and they're winning, I'm just like, I would love for people to get, if you vote for minimum wage like they did in Nebraska or Medicaid expansion in South Dakota, you clearly need a party that represents you. And the Republican Party isn't it. But they're not voting Democrat. That's the thing. They're not voting Democrat. How are you going to break into those kind of places, right? And I think NDP. I mean, they did that in the early 20th century. North Dakota had the Nonpartisan League, and Minnesota had the Farmer Labor Party, and
Oklahoma had the Socialist Party at one time.
I think they're the biggest socialist legislative delegation of almost any state.
Yeah, and think about Oklahoma today, politically speaking.
Yeah, see, that's another one where there was a Democrat. Oh God, I'm gonna forget his name. There was a Democrat who was back in the 60s or early 70s. In fact, he was considered a presidential candidate material. He may have actually ran in 76. I can't remember his name. I'm going to forget his name, and my friends will correct me in the comments. But he said Oklahoma's not a Republican state or a Democratic state. It's a populist state. Now, I don't know if that's obviously true. The way the religious right controls politics doesn't quite strike me as populist, but when you consider that this is a state that did vote for Medicaid expansion, did vote to reform the criminal justice system, did that it is the case that if you can get people on the issues, you can make the case. But today, trying to get a Democrat elected is just impossible. In fact, I had a friend who was a Democrat. I was following him on Twitter. He's a Democrat from Oklahoma City and in the state legislature. and somebody was engaging me like, well, what do you believe? And this Democrat said, well, I believe, all this, Medicaid expansion, all these other issues. And this guy goes, wow, I really love what you believe. It's too bad you're a Democrat because I can't vote for Democrats. Because I really agree with what you're saying. Well, why not vote for the person you agree with then?
That's why I would like to break up the two-party system, because it just is, it's the culture war that draws people into a team where they can't vote for somebody because of a party label. And the thing about it is that if we were to break up the two-party system, you can't have I think you're less likely to have a culture war that will be a stigma on people, where people will be vilified, and it will be more policy based.
I have to think that. I mean, it's not clearly the culture war is a real thing, and a lot of countries have it. But when you have a multi-party system, you can't do that deep polarization, right? And I think that helps. I mean, I think it even helps Canada, right? And I definitely think it helps in other countries like that have multi-party democracies. It's just hard to. Everything's not red and blue. Yeah, and
it's depressing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's depressing. I mean, I voted Green for senator, and I voted, as I said, with the judges, it was like I went harm reduction on the judges, because it's like, with the Republicans, I don't trust Republicans for judges because it's going to be the culture war for most of those judges. Maybe not all of them, but I just, I live in the South. And I know how Republicans are in the South. Not that I think that the Democrats are going to be great, but it just I went to harm reduction when it came to the judges in the courts. So I went and voted for the Democrats for the courts. It was because they're partisan here now with the courts in North Carolina.
Oh, well, so Montana is not partisan, but it's intriguing to me because we had and good news in Montana because there were some sad things that happened, at least like to me in Congress, and in particular because the Democrats were within a few thousand votes of unseating the Republicans in Western Montana. They didn't quite pull it off, and that would have been, it does indicate that seat needs to go, and maybe in 24 that's what will happen, or not that seat, but that Zinke in this case, Ryan Zinke. But one of the good bright spots in Montana was we have nonpartisan Supreme Court justices, right? But basically, it's been politicized. Everybody knows. In particular, they're trying to unseat Ingrid Gustafson, who was appointed by Governor Steve Bullock, right, and who has been very strong in support of abortion rights, and the Republican governor was pushing for a right-wing candidate. Anyways, Ingrid won. We have a pro-choice majority on the Supreme Court, the Montana Supreme Court, because of that, and one that respects privacy rights, which the Montana Constitution does anyways, and one that allows for a separation of powers, which is going to stop Republicans in our legislature who always try to overreach, right? Because they've got to. Once Republicans get control of the legislature, they're always trying to figure out a way to overreach. I'm getting a lot of calls. I know I'll have to head out here in a sec, but
so do I. But I want to say thank you for showing up here on the show. It's been a while, and we were supposed to do another show a while back on Christian nationalism, and I would love to do that. We'll probably do that probably sometime in the beginning of the year after the holidays and all that. Oop, did I say holidays? Oh my God! Christian nationalists will go and say you're supposed to say Christmas. No.
Well, my response is all holidays matter.
I like that. All holidays matter. Yeah, but anyway, So I think that we need to do that and everything, and as I said, it's kind of nice to get in touch again. We talk quite a bit on the phone anyway, but just to get in touch online, just to talk about stuff and how life after the Socialist Party and everything's good. But I'm good with the people from the Socialist Party now. I am. So I correspond with a lot of folks these days. So even people I was mad at the time.
I mean, the Christian nationalist thing obviously is very powerful, especially as a pastor, to see Christianity used in this way is really disconcerting. So I think that's obviously got the priority. But if you ever want to do so it wouldn't be current, but a Socialist Party remembrance.
We should do one. Which you want to do first? Well, I guess maybe the Christian nationalist one is probably going to still remain fairly relevant for the time being. We probably should do one in the beginning of the year, but maybe following a few months later, we should do one on the socialist. Just on this. What do you think?
I think it'd be fun. I think we should try that.
We need to multi-stream this. We need to get some other folks too.
Join in. Oh,
yeah.
Mary Cal Hollis. You'd be curious. You get a couple.
Catherine McCloskey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So,
get get about 10 of us in here, and we can just have a nice little chat about it.
yes, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you much for the invite. I'm going to head, but I appreciate being a part of this.
All right, thank you, Dwight. And listen, we'll talk soon, okay?
That sounds perfect. Okay.
All right,
Thanks
take care.
much.
Bye-bye. All right. All right, folks, I am going to sign out right now. So I'm sleepy. So y'all take care. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel and all that. So, and I'll see y'all next time.